Good evening, and thank you for joining us for tonight's Dallas Architecture Forum with distinguished architect Julie Eizenberg. I am Wendy Conradi, and on behalf of the Dallas Architecture Forum Board, we welcome you and thank you for joining us tonight virtually. I'm sure we will all be inspired by Julie's presentation as she tells us how her firm creates award-winning sustainable design that improves the lives of communities. If you have questions for Julie, she will answer them following her presentation, and you can submit your questions using the Q&A tab in your Zoom. And now, I'm pleased to introduce Jean Udaly, who would like to thank our sponsors and tell us a little bit more about upcoming events. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. We appreciate your leadership for the forum. We're honored that Julie's presentation tonight is the forum's annual Bob James Memorial Lecture. We're pleased to continue to recognize Bob's great legacy. We're grateful for our season sponsors and recognize tonight Maharger Development, Reggie Graham, and Smink, Art and Design. We're also very grateful for our series sponsors, which include Architectural Lighting Alliance, Bentley Tibbs Architect, Bodron Fruit, DLR Group Stoffelbach, Eggersman, Faisal Haloon Group, Headington Companies, HKS, Jackson Walker, Kafka Properties, Modern Dallas, O'Brien Architects, Perennials in Sutherland, and Scott and Cooner. We're thankful for our lecture sponsors, which include this evening the ADX Foundation and HDR Architecture, and JHP Architecture and Urban Design. We're also grateful to our reception sponsors, Corgan and Ibanez Shaw Architecture.
Thank you, Jean. Julie Eisenberg, a fellow of the American Institute of Architects, is a founding principal of Koning Eizenberg, where she is responsible for setting the studio's design vision. Her focus on the user experience, whether it is an individual, an underserved community, or the public at large, brings an empathetic perspective that underpins how Koning Eizenberg transforms mundane programs into welcoming spaces. The practice has been honored as AIA California's Firm of the Year, and Eizenberg, together with founding partner Hank Koning, was awarded the AIA Los Angeles Gold Medal and the Australian Institute of Architects Gold Medal. She was also recognized with an Honorary Ph.D. in Architecture from the University of Melbourne. Under her leadership, Koning Eizenberg has earned over 180 design, preservation, and sustainability awards. The studio's design practice is driven by tight budgets and a commitment to environmentally responsive design. This approach converts constraints into innovative and transformative design strategies. Notable projects include the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, Hancock Lofts, and 28th Street Apartments, as well as more recent projects like the PICO Branch Library and the Geffen Academy and Museum Lab. The firm's work has been published extensively, including ID, Architectural Records, Residential Architect, Vanity Fair, and Metropolis. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker, Julie Eizenberg.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you tonight. Okay, I think the first chat question is, who has a beer already? Because I don't. So it's really nice to be here. I wish I was in person in Dallas. I haven't been there for a while, and it's a place I really enjoy. So let's get started. Here we go. Hi. So LA neighborhoods are filling in. Not fast enough for all, but too fast for some. Development is propelled by housing shortage and improving transportation infrastructure. I know that you have issues in Dallas as well about housing, so hopefully we'll find some common ground that between us all tonight, we can solve the problem. That'd be great, wouldn't it? Let's start talking about housing, kind of the building blocks of neighborhoods. in Urban Hallucinations is a little sort of monography broadsheet thing we put out a couple of years ago, where we sort of brought together our studies on neighborhood and on housing. And as part of that publication, we started looking at a sort of analysis of post-war housing typologies. You know the ones where money, planning codes, and in LA, the limits of wood frame construction collide. It's the marketplace. Starts in the 60s with dingbats, which you probably are familiar with. They're the guys that look something like this. And they were the first kind of generation of housing that had to integrate parking. And the parking part becomes pretty interesting. And it sort of sets the parameters and how quickly can you get a permit and how do you build it cheaply with wood. And they end up not really having much interest in what the neighbors are doing, but certainly having an interest in what the tenant will get. Six-packs. Six-packs came around in the 80s, and they're called six-packs because there's 2 layers of parking with 4 layers of housing above. And they generally meant that more lots were collected together. They could look something like this. There was a quirk in the planning code that if you put your parking halfway submerged, it didn't count as a story. And that meant that you would conform with the 4-story height limits in many neighborhoods. So you see what people call cars in jail in this photograph. What's interesting here is that more cars are being required at this point. We're still on the escalation factor from 1 car probably in the 50s and the 60s to 2 cars in the 70s and the 80s. And it looks kind of something like this from above. And the model persists, as you can see from the neighbor on the right. It's all about building as much as you can and creating as much interior space as you can. Podiums came about in the 90s, and that was really with the rezoning of commercial boulevards. And commercial boulevards were more expensive than the residential housing property. And that pushed more parking further underground. And you know what a podium is, most of you here. The podium is what used to separate uses, but also separates floors to allow you to go taller. So it's a concrete layer, it can be 1 story or 2. Above you can have wood frame, and below you need to keep it concrete or similar. So along the boulevards, you get a lot of this. Now you're starting to get a kickback from the community, which is trying to impact planning regulations to say, hey, wait a minute, guys, you're going too fast. We don't like this, make things look smaller. So that you get a whole era of these collage buildings, which they're not convincing to me. I'm not sure. I thought communities were smarter and they wouldn't be convinced either. They look something like this. Again, there's not much heed paid to the neighbor. So when you look at the picture postcard of LA, it's pretty cool. But down on the streets, I'm pretty sure there's a better way to think about home, street, and in between. So that brings us to Santa Monica. This is where our practice is and where we live. And I'll sort of talk to you, well, the context of Santa Monica is it has a reputation for sustainability, progressiveness, and also for affordable housing progressiveness. So it's kind of a good place to sort of talk about those 2 issues a little bit. So 500 Broadway is the sponsoring project here. It's 250 units of market rate housing. And the attraction to the developer was the proximity to the Expo line, which connected downtown Los Angeles to the ocean and the 90,000 people who live in the city of Santa Monica on the edge of the Pacific. It's that whole nexus with transportation. And 500 Broadway is 250 market rate units. The ARROYO that you see within this sort of 5-minute radius, that's pretty interesting because the ARROYO is the required inclusionary affordable housing. So 500 Broadway and the ARROYO are both LEED Platinum. And as part of the entitlement for 500 Broadway, they had to provide at least 20% of the number of units they were going to provide market rate as affordable units, either on-site or off-site within a particular radius. So I'm going to talk to you about both projects. What was wonderful for us about 500 Broadway was it was an inventive developer and someone who had a budget. We usually work with the discipline of very tight budgets, which is fun, but this let us play a little. So 500 Broadway, generally housing is done as a sort of a courtyard, as you've been seeing, which creates a wall to the street. Cross-grain massing is much more effective for sustainability, especially in this orientation, so the breezes can move through. It also means that buildings behind get a glimpse view through rather than a continuous facade in front of them. This is sort of part of the strategies we're starting to call sticky space strategies. So a sticky space strategy is one that sort of collects a resonance between residents and community and residents. The other thing that we played around with here was the idea of breaking down the separation between the block that is retail on the ground floor and the apartments that are sitting above. So we sort of sculpted down to connect the two things together. I don't want to talk a lot about this project. I guess I will talk about the other way that we ornament, which is the same for all our projects, where we have sun shading, which you guys get to take advantage of too, and I think is God's gift to architects, that sunshades improve the energy performance of buildings. So here we are, and you can see some of the faceting we're doing, because we're also interested in, like, if we have a budget, how do we break down the idea of box? And we played a bit with that, but we're also cheating because this isn't strictly wood frame construction. You're starting to see, if you see the cursor sort of moving over here, it's steel frame, but this is actually a prefabricated moment steel frame. It's bolted together, not welded, which saves a lot of time on site. We've seen a lot talked about with modular, but there are also other technologies that are coming about that will save time in production of housing. And I was up there the other day, and actually the building looks more like the building on the left than the building on the right, and it was a lot of fun. The sister project is the ARROYO. So that had 250 units of market rate housing. The ARROYO has 64 units of affordable housing. So affordable housing makes you behave in a certain way relative to the architectural possibilities, especially to the idea of the typology of housing, because you have to work with cutout openings, because you can't afford to collect openings because the seismic requirements would make you introduce steel. So that's a disciplining factor. And you still have ornamentation that you can get through shading, which adds amenity and reduces cooling load. And then finally, by the way you move things around, you can get some expression. You can push a wall in a little bit, you can push a wall out, but it's the minimum of moves to make the maximum of effects. And the ripple effect here kind of is an homage to the origins of this site, which was, when it started, an ARROYO. And a train track went through that ARROYO, which was dismantled in the 1950s. The red square there on the far right is the site. And the expo line that you saw coming through to Oceanside is a new line that opened in 2016. After 50 years or more without a rail connection. And then there's 60s, and in the 1960s, infrastructure was about stormwater drains that were enclosed in concrete. So it's a 9-foot diameter stormwater drain that replaces that ARROYO and runs under between our building here. Now, what's great about the stormwater drain is that it legitimized our ability to put in-ground planting. So there are trees in here at the side of that drain that will allow us to get mature trees that will last really well with not a lot of maintenance. But again, we've got this issue of an open space. And if I take you through an open space for a community of families, many of them struggling, then is about how you make connections between one family and another to create support systems. So we spent a lot of time designing this open space. If the idea of the open space at 500 Broadway was about how you could give the tenants views out, the idea of the open space for this population was about how you could give them shared space to use to build community and friendship and mutual support. So who lives here? Well, there's the numbers. And it's a deed restricted project. Because it was built offsite, it's deed restricted in perpetuity. In the end, was able to support more housing units than we could have put on site. So it delivers 26% of the market rate in terms of a proportion rather than around 20, 21. And more importantly, the not-for-profit developer who was partnering in this said, look, when you have a population of families like this who are struggling, it's better to get them in one community so that they can offer each other mutual support. It's better than combining them in what we conventionally think is a better way of housing different socioeconomic groups. So there you see the sort of the open space and the kind of cross-grain massing again, the same as we used at 500, but to a different endpoint. It's also, as I said, LEED Platinum. And the courtyard between as it's growing in. So other kind of strategies that you use here is you use anything you can, you know. We need a fire life safety exit system. To do that, you could bury stairs in each of the buildings that you make, or you can bridge across. We got more value out of bridging across because we could make informal social connections between the upper levels and the courtyard and vice versa. And so you're kind of looking from the west. And again, coming back to that beginning of what are the formal games you can play? Where is the art in the making of buildings on a budget? And there's always that potential. And it's kind of a delight to have the discipline of that. So now this is a completely different kind of category of building. It's housing, and it's what we kind of call missing middle housing. So how can I frame this for you? So the first project I showed you, the 500, was about 160 units an acre in terms of density. And the ARROYO was probably 80 units per acre. I'm pretty sure that's right. This one is about 30, 33 units per acre. And if you want a frame of reference, the general sort of rule of what a single family house has as a units per acre is it's a quarter acre lot, which means there are 4 units per acre. So this kind of missing middle housing allows you the luxury of the open space that comes with single family houses with a lot less area. And in LA, and I'm guessing the same is true in Dallas, there's not enough of this kind of housing. So what you have here is on the left is Lincoln Boulevard, the same boulevard the ARROYO is about a mile up the road. This is a downhill site, which is allowed to have a boulevard kind of mixed-use building, which will come up high, and I'll show you that in a sec. But the rest of the sides is basically R1, or it's what they conventionally call single-family housing, and this is actually a flag lot. So here it is facing the boulevard, and this is where the building that's in construction now will come to. But the strategy here was to make the hillside work for us and to mediate between a fairly angry surrounding community who'd been shown a design that was a more conventional apartment building and said, hey, we're single family, we don't want this here. So we were tasked with making something that felt transitional, which pushed us to think about, again, about this idea of how you make houses with yards and communities that connect together with houses with yards. So you can see in the red drawing here, the flag lot entry that connects to the street, and the building's divided into 4 pieces. To get the building divided into 4 pieces, budget comes in, right? So budget comes in is, okay, if I've spent the money making more exterior wall, what can I do? So we eliminated the elevators, and that is possible to do if you put the disabled access units on the entry level. They have the same amenity as the other units. They have a little garden, and they basically become the front screening the parking garage. And you go up between them to a stair and you come to the 2nd level, and you can see how the 4 units, the units play out. I think there are 10 units altogether, one of which had to be affordable to conform with the city's inclusionary affordable housing policy. And that unit is a townhouse. And you can see what happens when you start to divide buildings up rather than trying to agglomerate them. A space doesn't have to be sensible between a building, it has to be evocative. And the game that we're playing here is with a budget and the issue of the cutout window. There was no budget for second layers of shrouds of things, and there wasn't budget for steel moment frames to allow you to do large areas of glass. Nor could you do large areas of glass and conform with the energy code. So things are sort of conspiring to get us back to a time where the cutout has to be dealt with. And here's the community space leading to individual gardens and front doors. What we're doing here is what you're seeing through the door on the right is actually a retaining wall. So you're 8 foot down from the apartment, from the single family houses next door, but you've made a positive space out of a side yard. And the genius here, I think anyway, is that instead of doing a fancy door system, we actually just got a custom metal screen door and painted it orange to add a sense of customization and craft. That's my trick, and you have to write to me for permission to use it. Which brings us to downtown Los Angeles, which is a fairly harrowing experience these days. And what you're looking at is a building that was in construction that we had designed on adjacent to Skid Row. And what you can tell is that there's just not enough permanent housing to get people off the street. So floor is supportive housing. For those of you who don't know what supportive housing is basically the first kind of permanent housing for people who are no longer living on the street. It's generally a single person with a bed, a kitchen, and some amenity, but really the key goal is to also get services on site and to create a sense of community. So some of the same rules apply that applied at the ARROYO, even though it was multifamily housing, as it does with this, which is more independent living housing. And you see the same set of strategies, but sort of tweaked a bit. We're looking for more modulation. You start to see that we're carving in this one, as well as pinching out. And then, yes, a bridge instead of another fire stair. And the front door, I mean, I'm talking about things in formal terms, but truthfully, we start every project with, what does it feel like to come home? If you can't answer that question, then you haven't given this the emotional strength to be a place that people will feel comfortable in. And moving through sorry, what I needed to show you there was as you come through the front gate to the right, and in the second picture, that's where on-site counseling and other services are available. And what you're looking at below that is the street tree that took a lot of effort, actually, to get planted in the city. You would think the city would want to encourage you to plant a tree, but not always. And then moving up that courtyard, which we were really thrilled about too, again, the idea of a courtyard where you could have in-ground planting that would give a respite for the people who are residents in the facility, but could also give a little give back to the neighborhood, the same as has happened at ARROYO, where the green infill, because you saw all that construction that was happening along Lincoln Boulevard when I showed you that opening little video sequence, that will be a respite in a very quickly densifying piece of city. So moving up. And the main social floor. And one of the lounges. And looking back down that cascading garden down to the street. And then looking at the staircase that we invested in to encourage people to use the stairs rather than the elevator. Good way to help people get fit without a lot of effort. And also to create a sense of informal opportunity for interaction. The section, single loaded, the unit, they're very simple, have a little kitchen, they have a table, they're provided with a double bed and bathroom. So that's the floor. So what about the resources for neighborhoods? That's need to go to the next set of notes. Hold on, guys. Well, I would say that the neighborhood library is emblematic of the idea of a community resource. And luckily, I have 3 to show you, starting with Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We've been working with the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh for many years now, and they believe that you bring back neighborhood by doing programs for children and families. It started out with the Children's Museum, which is this building here. I think you can follow my cursor, it's the domes, which linked an abandoned planetarium with a historic post office. It extended with the taking back of a abandoned plaza into a park designed by Andrea Cochran, a children's park, and now is ending up with re-envisioning the first public neighborhood library under the Carnegie Endowment, the Allegheny Free Library. Bringing back neighborhoods with programs in disinvested neighborhoods, more often than not, means bringing back abandoned buildings. So here we are, it's 1890, and this is the first of the Andrew Carnegie Endowment libraries, which were built all around the world. And it's quite an extraordinary thing that he did. He's a steel magnate and industrialist, as you probably know, and he was an immigrant. Immigrants get a bad name, but this guy shouldn't. He believed that access to knowledge, hard work, and merit got you places. And he built libraries to provide access to knowledge, which at that time was mainly found in books. So the library plan, at the time, books were the pathway to knowledge, and books were valuable and revered. So what you would do if you come to the public library, this is the delivery room. So you come up the front stairs, a little bit of awe and splendor, you walk up the stair, through the lobby. The delivery room was where you would go. You would ask for the book you want. They would go to closed structural stacks, which are really cool. And then you would take your book when it was delivered to you, and you would go to the reading room. This piece here on the north, the music hall, was added later and was part of the augmentation of neighborhood resources that followed. So here's the reading room. It's austere. You sit upright. And unfortunately, 100 years later, it doesn't look anything like this. The library was empty since about 2006 when it was hit by lightning. Some renovations in the 60s had sealed up plasterwork, and plasterwork, the mortar had turned to sand. And the Museum of Pittsburgh saw it as a resource to expand programming and bring it back to life. Which brings us to the Museum Lab. The Museum Lab is a sort of a modern day concept of what a library could be, except instead of books, it's access to tools. It was geared to 10 to 14-year-olds who are underserved. It provides studios for art, technology, and fabrication. It includes a charter middle school for 140 kids. And it draws on partners like Carnegie Mellon and the University of Pittsburgh, who facilitate innovative technologies and analyze the potential of the collaboration between formal learning, as provided by a school in a classroom, and informal learning as takes place in a museum setting. The hope is to see if there's a new paradigm for learning that come out of this shared relationship. So what did we do? We did a couple of things. I've been giving this talk a bit, and I keep forgetting to start at the core place. The really core place to start at is the elevator. So on the ground floor, you can see we've put a new elevator here, and I think you can see my cursor. So I'm on the left, and I'm just above the Grable Gallery, which was the delivery room. That position allowed the elevator to serve all levels of the building, which is trickier than it sounds. And that then set up many other things. We didn't change much of the configuration of the building. We did add a flooring where some of the structural stacks had been to get some more space. The only real key addition we made was this blue space on the second floor with the mezzanine above, which was a gathering space, which was kind of a bonus strategy to allow access from the elevator to the charter school. And it's in an old light well. And I can show you how that works here in the section more easily. So there's the gathering space. And that's the only bit that's really new. Okay, so we start this and we think, oh, what we're going to do is we'll just strip it back. We'll paint up what we have, which is, be a great restoration. We'll liven it up because we can't have it exactly as it was at the beginning because it's pretty serious and not a great format for teen exploration. But underneath these encapsulated columns, they've actually had to cut out column capitals to be able to encase it in that drywall surround. And that meant that when you pull that plaster away, that you had basically the armatures that held up those capitals. Now, there's some cool things about that. If Carnegie was a steel magnate, it's nice to see the steel that he made. But what's even more interesting is the fit that we started to see emerging between the idea of technology and exploration and creativity. And as a group, we kind of started to run with the idea of the place as a ruin that was discovered, an archaeological find that gave the eye and the mind a lot to think about. Behind the museum reception desk, you see a screen that was made out of some of the platform material for the structural stacks. We anticipated commissioned art, of which this is one piece, and we had to patch a lot of ceiling in different ways that I'll explain as we go through. We get to the Grable Gallery, which was that delivery room I pointed to, and you can see what it was in the middle, and you can see what was happening in discovery. And this is how it looks now. Now, what's interesting here is more commissioned art. The museum commissioned Freeland Buck, who are a great little architecture firm, to do an installation that evoked the old Tiffany glass ceiling that used to be here and long gone. So that went there, and then we started to look at what the formal structure of how do you make decisions about what's old and what's new. So what you're seeing at that cut line of the texture is we declared areas as sort of stabilization, preservation areas. And all we did was clean them up so that you didn't poke your eye out with a piece of steel that was coming out in the wrong place. And then the rest, we sort of cleaned up. And then we also camouflaged things that we needed to add, like insulating plaster so the energy performance of the building would be better. And I'll sort of walk you through rather quickly. I can sometimes talk too long, so I'm trying to go fast today so there's lots of time for questions. The kind of activities the kids get to do. Now we're upstairs. And upstairs, what you're looking at is the light well where we put that new gathering space, and some of the spaces that we started to uncover is remove toilets from these wonderful spaces. So if you look at the bottom part where it says discovery, we'd already removed the toilets, and this is what we were able to achieve. We exaggerated the cutouts of the windows that went into the light well to make stronger connections, and we brought light from the ceiling to wash the walls, come through the floor and wash the space below. The charter school, the assembly hall on the 3rd level that was so difficult to reach. And the energy and the opportunity for kids to reconfigure, make a mess, and feel in charge. And then the bonus find at the front door as we were finishing the project, as some holes were punched in the plaster, all this terracotta, which was completely intact, was revealed. And it was a thrill to expose it and set it free. So let's talk about PICO Branch Library. This is more conventionally the kind of library that would be the offshoot of the Carnegie libraries, right? But nowadays, a library is much more informal than in Carnegie's day. And reaching the public in the digital age means creating social energy and offering choice as much as books. We had remodeled the park where the library is located some 10 years earlier, which I think gained trust in a community, a very diverse community who didn't feel that the city had their interests at heart. They wanted to bring families, often with who were not native English speakers, many Hispanic families, immigrant families from around the globe, and also African Americans. So there was this community, this diverse community, hitting a sort of a conventional white, upwardly mobile, single-family house community from the South. And the park was where these two communities, or multiple communities, came together. So a library in the digital age is not the quiet place set aside. It's basically got to be a hub. And the community put it right, give it to them. They asked for a living room in the park because they believed that was the best way to get kids to come into the library and feel at home. You can see where it's located. That little red box kind of shows you where it goes. And you can see that it's crossing a fire lane, which we thought was a liability and turned into an opportunity. And I'll explain that in a little bit. So there's the library. The reading room is on the right of that fire lane, which is a walk street when it's not needed for fire, and the community room on the left. The reason we needed to do that was that the community also told us, hey guys, don't you dare take any of our green space. And okay, that made sense to us. Here's the plaza where the farmers market happens every Saturday. Here's some of the program space, which has the teen center and other activities. And because we needed to connect these two buildings together, we were able to height up the connection across the fire lane to actually pump up the identity of the building and to pump up the connection between north and south through the park. So to get this building to work, it's basically a sort of integrated sustainable design approach using light harvesting. The more light you get into the building, the more transparency you have from the outside, which we forget about, but a lot of the glasses we use these days are reflective. So that strategy dictated the shape of the ceiling, and it pulls and pushes to move the light around and to make sure that no sunlight actually hits any of the collection. And the sustainable strategies also included a lot of water strategies. This also is a LEED Platinum building, and actually the first municipal building in the county to reuse grey water for toilets. It's a long story. You can ask me in the chat if you want more information about it. It shouldn't have been that difficult. So you can start to see how the building looks. You can see some of the informal gestures, like the draped screen, like you would get at a farmer's market, as institutionalized in the actual architecture. The pattern you get for free from shadow. I mean, I guess I'm overstating this aspect of the ability of using the sun and shading devices to create ornament, and in this case, to pump out electricity. And the way you make a strong connection north-south, the front of the library. Inside, the sort of quality of the sculpted space, it has an acoustic plaster on it to tamp down the noise, but this isn't a silent library. You don't go to this library if you're looking for Carnegie's library. This is a library that encourages collaboration and encourages informal behavior. And as you can tell, the little kid at the front is really up to no good, but I just don't know what it is. And you can see the strong connections made with outside, the bump into kind of strategy with the farmers market. It's really another example of that sort of sticky space thinking we talked about, of trying to make resonant connections between activities. Some more shots, and then again looking to the east over the soccer field and the basketball court. And yes, people have fun there. And as you can see, sun shading devices and a lighting strategy can really give you a strong identity. Final project I want to show you is the student pavilion in my hometown of Melbourne, Australia. And I was a student there, and the dotted line sort of shows you the outline of the formal part of the university, but like most universities, it's sort of spread its tentacles in all directions. And the downtown, as you see in the background, is maybe a mile's walk, if that, down the road. The University of Melbourne's 55,000 students, maybe more. There's an incredible research reputation. But most of the students, unlike research universities here, don't live on campus. They live out in the community, and they are really struggling with having enough space to study and enough opportunity for recreation. And the university realized it needed to up its game in terms of the amenities that it provided to give the students a better student experience. So this was approached as what we our team is kind of like a diversity model. So if student populations are diverse, why shouldn't teams of architects be diverse and bring different attitudes to what a building could be like? And on an infill project like this, where some of the buildings stayed and were renovated and others were added new, it made a lot of sense. What we were all clear about was that we wanted an identity for the student precinct that unified things. And as you probably know, Australia is becoming, is coming to grips with its past and reconciliation with the Aboriginal peoples. And what we tried to do is, with the two landscape architects who worked on this and consultation with the tribes that were involved, whose natural grounds were in this location, started to look at how to reinstate the qualities of the pre-colonial landscape. And that landscape moves all the way through the project and through to the student pavilion and inside the ground plane. Now, I guess we got the student pavilion because it had the most sort of neighborhood-like program. It was the most informal. I mean, the whole collective student precinct has arts, culture, study, graduate study programs, different sort of event centers. But this little program is about 25,000 square feet. And it has a food hall, a retreat rooftop for events and relaxation, study space, and a recreational library. So now we've inverted the whole idea of a library from where we started. This was not about growing knowledge. This was a place where you're allowed to go when you're at the Road and White Library, it's a place to relax and not study. And when we were students, we used to go to the Road and White Library in its current location and listen to Grateful Dead with headphones and other accessories to make the experience better. No more said there, right? But the Road and White is still popular with students, particularly foreign students who see it as a really homey environment to me. So if I sort of keep going, so this sort of stacked program of food, study and library and events is threaded with a series of kind of dancing columns that join it all together. So if I sort of go through the diagram, this is looking north-south, so you don't see these precast column shapes. And then from the west, and a combination of glass and wood. And the students had actually let the university know that they wanted a more clear-cut view of sustainable values reflected in the buildings. There's PVs on the roof, and there's a wood cladding on the outside. And it's in construction, which is a thrill, except we can't go there. It's really kind of difficult doing this COVID style. You can see how the building divides up. The ground floor one, which is food service, generally sort of informal food hall, market hall. 2 and 3, which link together with the informal study in the library, and the two-story library actually. And then the 4th floor, which is more event and more sort of backyard kind of sensibility. Now, interestingly enough, the main circulation in this building isn't inside. There is a stair that links all of the floors here, 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 but the main circulation is on the outside. So as you come to the university from Swanson Street, which is the where the tramway runs, you come in and you start to see activity at the bottom with the food. You see the wood siding. We're facing north, which is the sunny side, for those of you who feel turned around. And you can see how the building stacks up. But we took a lot of the expression of the building and put it on this west face where the circulation is taken outside to really exaggerate the gesture of welcome for everyone, that they could use all of it, and that this was a student facility that belonged to them. On the second level, connecting to arts and culture, which is behind us. The sustainability sort of strategy in terms of heating and cooling with mixed mode spaces, top and bottom, and conditioned space between. Moving inside. Light-filled spaces that allow students to have somewhere to hang out between classes and to give them the kind of student experience that they deserve at a university like Melbourne University. And then back out again towards sort of a slightly diagrammatic version of the welcome landscape that runs through the site and brings back some of the pre-colonial grades and plant material and paving materials as well. So there you go. You've been around the world in 40 minutes, starting in LA, heading to Pittsburgh, then down to Australia. And I look forward to talking to you about what I've presented and ideas that you have about how we can make the world better. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. Amazing presentation. We really appreciate it. We have some questions for you. So the first one is, how long does it usually... Okay, there we go. Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so first question is, how long does it usually take to collect ideas and specific requests from neighbors, for example, when designing the PICO library?
Oh, that's a really good question. If you take too long, it doesn't work. If you take too short, people don't feel they've had an opportunity to talk. I would say the sweet spot is between 3 and 6 months.
Okay, great. Can you talk more about the Smart Gardens role in the PICO branch library?
Could you say that again?
Yeah, the question is, can you talk more about the Smart Gardens role in the PICO branch library?
Okay. So what there is the water management system that collects all of the runoff water on the site and then lets it percolate back down to the water table. The smart system was actually taking roof runoff water, storing it in a tank and using it to flush toilets. Not very exciting, it seems, but it does save a lot of water and work very well because we have very seasonal rain. So you can't sort of depend on water storage all year. The funny part about that was that the county made us put a sign on the toilets that said dogs should not drink this water. And once dogs read, I think it'll be a useful sign.
Yeah, bureaucracy. The next question I think is actually related to it. It says, I really like the natural lighted spaces that occur in the PICO library. Can you talk about the gray water toilets issue, which I think you kind of just did?
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. You're from Australia, but you've been living and working in LA for decades. Can you tell us how LA has impacted or inspired your practice?
That takes a drink. But I think LA is a place that collects people that come from somewhere else. And I think there was a freedom of being, nobody knew me, nobody knew us, I should say, and that we had room to experiment. And if we failed, that was okay. I think when you work from your hometown, it's really rough because when you screw up, everybody sees you screw up. So I would say it was more emotional freedom. And the beauty of the landscape was captivating and the light. And it was just familiar enough to be a little bit homey to us. If you've been to Australia, you'll understand that. And especially with all the eucalyptus around the LA area. But it's a really interesting question. I love the position of immigrant outsider. It took me years to decide to become a citizen because I feel that it's a creative position. It's a way of looking outside of yourself at something else and seeing things that when you're immersed in it every day, you don't get a chance to see.
The sustainable goals in your projects, did your clients push for them or did you insist on them or both?
You can't do sustainable stuff unless your client's on board, because we can kid ourselves, but generally if you're looking for anything that's more than code, at this point, it costs a little bit more money, and that's fine. The reward is worth it, but they need to be on board. Often what helps getting them on board is funding sources that require it.
Yeah, how much do you think the LA zoning and kind of building standards help push better design in multifamily housing out there?
Oh, what I meant to say to that question is that there's fantastic set of regulations, in case someone from California is listening. But the real issue at the moment is that the regulations are not facilitating good design. And when you see it coming from LA, and even when you've seen it in the past, LA has actually had more regulations than people think it has. I think there's a sensibility of freedom that's expressed in what people do that is got nothing to do with what the code makes easy.
Next question, what percentage difference is there between digital models versus physical models that you use?
So to me, a model, digital or physical, is really to do with what's familiar enough for you to understand what you will get when you make it, right? It's a device to test whether you're going to get what you want, what you thought you were going to get. So I don't believe that there's a right or wrong way to do it. I think big models are really captivating. If I could, I would do physical models all the time because I just love the feel of them. They sort of make you feel like you're doing art. Whereas a digital model, you always think, oh, it's just in the screen. But I believe the proof is in the pudding. If the building is good, then the medium you're using to explore ideas will work for you. And there's no one right medium, and we use many.
We have time for a couple more questions. If you have some, just send them in via Zoom. So Julie, you talked about creating kind of libraries as hubs, and the Carnegie Library, the one in Pittsburgh that was the rehabilitation of that building, how do you think that functions as a hub versus say like the PICO that's basically new construction?
New versus old, I would say you got to get over that, because most of the buildings that we're going to see over the next 20 years have to be adaptive reuse buildings, because there's so much real estate that is not working for purpose, so that it will have to be reused and updated. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I actually think it's kind of fun. The Children's Museum program basically gives teens a place to call home outside of the home, in the same way I guess a Boys and Girls Club does if you're athletically minded. But it has great programs. It fills the gap that isn't provided in the public school system. And its agenda is skill building and knowledge building. The library is also knowledge building, but it's basically to give a place to do reading and writing, right? And it's where you can find a book, or you can find, there's a lot of Spanish language DVDs that are leased out of, well, not leased, loaned out of that library. It's a hub of family activity that encourages the idea that study is fun, that a place with books and things that you do at school is, you know, it's okay. It's just as much fun as kicking a football around. And that the side product of that will be is that you won't dismiss learning as something that is sort of institutional and something that you can't do.
Next question is, if you were here in Dallas, Julie, you would see a proliferation of boring podium-style multifamily housing. How can we as design professionals, developers, clients, and citizens take housing to the next level, like some of your examples?
Well, thank you very much for the compliment. But I think it's about reframing what we're doing, which is why with this sort of silly little term of sticky space thinking has become something we're using. It's about inverting what the responsibility of the development is. And it's not even that it costs more. That's the interesting part. It's a mindset. It's like, if you're going to take something, you give something. And we used to think that that was fitting in, and that was the biggest mistake. So if we stop framing the idea of giving back as fitting in and thinking about as a positive contribution, it changes the game. So for example, that's why cross-grain massing has appealed to us, because the standard is these walls of courtyard housing, right, that enclose a space on the inside, but give nothing really back to the street. And we found at the moment that this is a good strategy of giving back, and it gives some green space and lets the breezes through. So it's kind of a win-win.
Good. Your mastery of light is superb. Is that an Aussie influence?
Pardon, what was the question?
They said your mastery of light is superb. Is that your Aussie influence?
Of course it is.
Okay. Has there been a time when you changed the design based on user research or realization it wouldn't serve the user's experience as it was originally planned?
I can give a sort of a little story on that one. So in supportive housing, people in our office, including myself, were incredibly frustrated by some of the silly regulations. The disabled access bathroom is a great idea, but it eats a lot of space when the building of space is so expensive. So we thought, well, what's the point of this, right? These big bathrooms, they're silly. Or the regulation that says you have to have a doorbell on the front door. Why are we spending money on doorbells? And then you talk to people in the building, and there was one, these are all anecdotal. The lady with the doorbell, she said, I love the doorbell. It makes me feel that I have a place that's mine. So there you go. You completely upended on what you thought you were going to think. The bathroom, the guy says, he said to us, wow, I never thought I'd get a hotel bathroom. So you are giving, it's not always what you think it's going to be. We do go back and do post-occupancy evaluation. The strongest part is that the need is so strong, it's really hard a lot of the time to sift away just the having of an amenity from whether the design itself is contributing to the joy of having that amenity. And I think it's very sad that we're in that sort of desperate a time. And I still believe that design does have a subliminal impact on your sense of well-being, or I wouldn't still be talking about neighborhood as much as I do. And so, yeah, it's a really good question.
How do you feel about the amount of retail that's required at street level for mixed use projects?
Okay, so we got a problem. We have planners. So the problem with the planning cycle in terms of what you're required to do for master plans for cities and stuff lags behind what's happening in the real world. And when you're in an escalated cycle like we are with the digital age, with what happens with COVID, everything is topsy-turvy and it's hard to change. And the planner department go-to strategy for enlivening street is retail, except we all know that retail was dying. And so you can't expect that the ground floors of all of these buildings are going to be retail anymore. Now, I don't know how we handle that, because, you know, the idea of these active streets makes a lot of sense. But we're exploring that, and when I know more, I'll come back to you. And if you have ideas, please send them to me. It's a tricky situation.
Going to do two more questions. Next to last is, how does adaptive reuse of historic buildings compare in budget to new construction? And does that make it more difficult or extensive for fundraising for the project budget?
Oh, well, first of all, when it's a historic building, you can't pull it down. So you've got to account for it in your budget no matter what. So it's not an either or. I think there's something about historic buildings that adds to the strength of the ask, because it's about roots. And generally in any neighborhood or in any community, there's enough roots attached to the cultural value or historic value of the artifact. And that is the first thing that you have to encourage them to be part of your venture. So I would say adaptive reuse should be, but I'm not a fundraiser. This is Julie logic, not fundraiser logic. would be a plus, not a negative. In terms of cost of construction, it's, what's that house where they keep sinking money into it? Sorry, that movie with the house that they keep having to put more money into? The money pit, right?
Right.
The deal is you don't know what you have. I mean, we did not know the state of the building until we started doing the destructive demolition to see what was below the additions from the 50s and from the 60s. What we had to be was flexible because we did not have a budget to restore that ornamentation. There's only one interior plaster worker in Pittsburgh at this point in time. So these kind of crafts are no longer available to use in the way that the traditional way of restoring buildings says you should if you're going by the conventions of preservation. And I think to a certain extent, we have to rethink those rules because I think they're out of date. I think they're out of date culturally. And I think they consider that there's only one way of interpreting what's important about a building. And I have I have other case studies that's to do with culture and diversity, but I can't go into them now. But I really believe that we've been seeing in terms of Black Lives Matters and issues of social equity have to make you question what we think is important in preservation and how we go about doing it.
Yes. Final question. You've transformed libraries, farmers markets, and affordable housing. What do you think is ripe for transformation next?
Oh, healthcare. If anyone out there hates going to the doctor or the way medicine is dispensed, I love to get my hands into that. I just feel that there's no reason it should make the hair on your back of your neck sort of stand on end like, oh, here I am, I have no power and I'm stuck here. And I think that architecture could do a lot to change the sort of cultural vibe of the setting. And I think that would be great.
Well, Julie, thank you so much for speaking to the forum. It's been amazing. We really appreciate how you take tight budgets, innovative design, sustainability, and create welcoming neighborhoods and hubs for people to come and gather in a sense of neighborhood and belonging. So thank you again. Good night. And thank you all of us for joining us. Have a nice evening. Take care.
Good night.